Before the release of Tears of the Kingdom, I observed interesting things about the waterways in Hyrule, and it left me with numerous questions about the world that existed long before Breath of the Wild. Following the release and getting a glimpse into the past, it made my theoretical answers to those questions even stronger candidates to explain how the world got to where it is, with regards to the hydrological developments of the land. I've thought of many titles for this exploration, but I think The Other Great Flood really says it best. Let's take a dip into the deep end of the hydrology of Hyrule. In Tears of the Kingdom, at the back of the Forgor Temple, just beyond the Chamber of Stone Room, is the Map Room. It shows us a view of Hyrule from an unknown time. At least it was unknown until Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks came out. We'll get to that in a moment. One of the most notable observations of this map is that the central plain of Hyrule has a considerable body of water in it. There are other observations to be made as well. Floria River isn't fully exposed yet, Toto Lake is pouring into Lake Akala, Dueling Peaks wasn't split yet, and so on. I could explain them all, but there are hundreds of differences. Instead, I'm going to show you all of them at once. Until I made this comparison to highlight the differences, I was of the opinion that the map room terrain was an abstraction of the real thing and not to be taken too seriously. When seeing the degree of minor and major differences in this terrain compared to the era of the wilds, we can see that great care was taken to sculpt that map. To really illustrate the differences here, I think we need to take this into the third dimension. One could simply write off the missing Floria River under that critique of the map, but it isn't like they omitted all small bodies of water. Bloodleaf Lake is present, and it is objectively smaller than Lake Floria, and roughly the same size as the Spring of Power, which is also missing from the map. Even the water on the central plain would have been very shallow compared to the mere depths of the water in some of the smaller lakes and ponds that they included. The question, however, remains: when was this map created? In reviewing Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks, there is a passage covering this map that provides more context. Let's take a look. In English, it says the following. When was this model made? First of all, the terrain is from before the Twin Peaks split. The legend of the Twin Peaks is from a time long ago, even by modern standards, but it is certain that it was made before that time. Next, the model that looks like the current Hyrule Castle is placed in the center, and this is the most notable point. Hyrule Castle is located in this place after the conclusion of the Seal War. Also, the tablet says "a tear for a tear" in Hyrulean script. The language used during the Seal War was supposedly the Old Hyrulean script, so we can assume that the reliefs on the ground were made after the Seal War. When you put all this together, you can deduce that it was after the end of the Seal War, when the relocation of Hyrule Castle was complete, and many years had passed before the Twin Peaks split. It seems that it was not left behind by the wise men of the time. However, it is not certain that the topography of Hyrule and the relief of the ground painting were created in the same era. It is possible that the model of the whole of Hyrule was created in preparation for the battle against the Demon King, or when the temple was built, and that it was later remodeled. Investigating the production era of the model and the relief may also lead to estimating the transition of Hyrule. In fact, the model suggests that Hyrule Plain was connected to a river in ancient times and may have been a wetland area. It is possible that the area was reclaimed and turned into a plain as Hyrule Castle was built, and facilities were built around it, and the castle town and other areas became busy. So we know this was created following the events of the Imprisoning War, and in the words of every Legend of Zelda YouTuber ever, I have a theory about why. To really understand it, we need to look at a few possibilities and the evidence that each possibility brings. The Ceres Scablands are an excellent place to start. First and foremost, let's look at the name. Ceres is a reference to the sage Ceres, a descendant of the sages that helped to seal the sacred realm in the Downfall timeline. Scablands are barren and sometimes topsoil-free zones that have experienced cataclysmic flooding. An example of this in the real world are the channeled Scablands. They are a region in western Washington state in the US that formed after the Cordilleran ice sheet broke, which acted as a dam for the Lake Missoula Glacier. Any considerable body of water could form Scablands if unleashed. While it is possible that there was a similar situation with the area, I would hazard a guess that the namesake of the adjacent Thundra Plateau is an indicator to the source of the formation of the area. Alternatively, if there was a glacial lake that broke open, causing a similar situation as the channeled Scablands, perhaps the cause of that breakage was due to a high-velocity impact to the surface, which could explain the Giza crater site, the cause of which is also unknown. To give a fair examination to that site as a potential cause, we need to confront other aspects of the region, such as Mount Hebra. It alone could be circumstantial evidence of past potential glacial activity. Pretending for a moment that Tanagar Canyon didn't exist in this hypothetical scenario, let's take a look. Mount Hebra itself warrants an entire examination, which I am in the planning stages for. But I'm going to do my best to cover the geomorphological aspects of the mountain to explain why it could be the cause of the craters or even the source of the mythical glacier. If we take a closer look at the Hebra East Summit, we can observe that there are channels leading away from Cold Snap Hollow towards Kopiki Drifts, Hebra Plunge, Lake Kilsey, and the Sternita Basin. While rapid thawing of the tundra could cause some of that, I would expect to see channel formation around the entirety of the East Summit area. Unless, of course, the thawing only happened on the western side, due to the lava flows under Hebra. If that was the case, though, you would still expect to see more evidence of that in terms of channeled erosion, but it simply isn't there. I believe there is a better explanation for the channel formation, and that explanation is that Hebra was once an active volcano. The evidence for volcanic activity far exceeds the evidence for rapid thawing. We have the hot springs, indicators of subsurface magma chambers. We have the actual lava falls in the depths, and there we have the Cold Snap Hollow site, which seems to be the source of the channels. If this were merely the result of rapid thawing, Cold Snap Hollow would have been a great container for the water. Not unlike Picture Lake in Washington State here in the US. Cold Snap Hollow also looks a great deal like what you'd expect from a closed cone volcano that experienced collapse following a major eruption. The channels look a great deal like what you'd expect from pyroclastic flow formation. We can even observe the formation of teeth along the channels going down to the Sternita Basin. It's worth asking if the reason that Hebra is so cold is because of volcanic winter. It's for this reason that I would rule out the Hebra region as being a contributor to any sort of glacial activity that may have contributed to the Ceres scablands and subsequently the flooding of the Central Plain. On the opposite side of the map, there's a much better answer to this question. Let's take a look at the Zora and Rutala rivers. As we navigate them, let's have a look at the banks and cliffs. Both rivers feature overhanging cliffs, and that type of formation has a name: undercut erosion. Undercut erosion is exactly what it sounds like. This type of erosion can happen via rapid formation or over time. If the rivers alone had this erosion, I would say that they formed over millions of years. However, they are not alone. Zora's Domain, East Reservoir Lake, and the Rudo Precipice areas were once large mountains, all of which experienced collapse, most likely due to subsidence events. If we look at each of the sites, we can see substantial overhanging cliffs, with East Reservoir Lake making up the largest of the three. You may be wondering, what is subsidence? It's a term used to refer to any event where the surface of a planet experiences downward movement. It can be caused by natural or unnatural processes. In the case of these sites, this was likely caused by the acidification of the caverns beneath the surface. Carbonic acid forms as water picks up carbon dioxide from the air, where the permeation into soil or other structures creates a weak acid chain. Guess what produces carbon dioxide in abundance? Things that breathe oxygen. There are a number of examples of this in the era of the wilds. If you want to see an example of this type of formation in the middle stages, I'd recommend checking out the Lanairu Wetlands Byroad. If these sites weren't roommates with the Lanairu Great Spring, perhaps they would have simply formed karst caves, leading to much less dramatic channels for the Zora and Rutala rivers. There are a few ways that this collapse could have happened. If any single one of the three sites were filled with water from the Lanairu Great Spring prior to the subsidence, it would be catastrophic to the Central Plain and adjacent settlements. When examining comparable areas, I found something startling which helps to inform my opinion on exactly how this went down. The number of caves packed into the Zora's Domain area is substantial. There are 24 caves in that area alone. For perspective, Eldon Volcano, which is roughly twice the size, has just 16 caves. The entire Hebra region, which is 4 times the size, also has 24 caves. The density of caves per square kilometer is higher there than anywhere else in Hyrule. Until recently, I could only imagine that this mountain must have looked like Swiss cheese prior to subsidence. Then I got some proof that it actually did. In Hyrule Encyclopedia, there is a map that is labeled as depicting locations of historical significance. On the map is an area with the name Zora's Fountain. It features 3 mountains that show signs of considerable erosion. While I don't take this map to be canonical in the sense of representing any known state of the world in totality, I do take each location as canonical based on the intent of the Zelda team that created it. Based on all the evidence, my hypothesis is that the Rudo Mountain area collapsed first, followed by the mountain that would cover the current Zora's Domain area, and then finally the East Reservoir Lake Mountain. What's unclear is the degree to which each collapse may have contributed to the immediate or eventual collapse of the others. For example, the size and evidence of undercut erosion on the cliffs of Ploymus Mountain demonstrate that it once held a considerable amount of water. If it was filled to capacity at the time of collapse, it would have released 54 billion liters of water. If you live in a country that still measures rams to the hogshead, that is almost 15 billion gallons of water. Even if it was only halfway filled, the force of that would have probably been enough to cause the Zora's Domain mountain to collapse, and then the Rudo Mountain area as well. Inversely, any one of the three may have weakened an adjacent mountain and set off a chain reaction. Whether eventual or immediate, it would have been bad. I try not to swear in my videos, but everyone would have been fucked. It makes me wonder if that's what happened to the River Zora, who are noticeably absent from the era of the wilds. Even if East Reservoir Lake went first, it would have taken the floodwater roughly 5 to 6 minutes to reach Hyrule Field if the surrounding rivers were already almost at the same level as most of the field itself. At present, the rivers sit about 38 to 40 meters below the field on the west side. Crenell Hills would have provided somewhat of a barrier to the plain, but not for long. Depending on the salinity of the water coming from the Lanayru Great Spring, it may have been catastrophic for any aquatic life in Lanayru Bay, Horon Lagoon, and the Spoolbite. Any settlements on Samasa Plain or the present-day Lanayru wetlands area would have been erased from the surface. I could go on, but I think I'd rather show you. This took an unfortunate number of hours to render, and if it wasn't so time-intensive to set up, I would have captured this at other angles. Without further ado, the flooding of the Central Plain. Like much of my research, we may never know for sure that this theory is correct without some sort of official confirmation from the development team. In spite of that, I feel strongly that we are looking at a probable cause for how the Central Plain became flooded. I have more research like this on the way, and if you enjoyed it, flood the comments and let me know. I'd love to hear from you.